The cherry blossoms fell like pink snow across the imperial gardens of Meiji-era Kyoto, dusting the shoulders of Asher Caldwell as he knelt among the azaleas. His weathered hands, stained with soil and calloused from years of tending to the emperor's botanical treasures, worked methodically among the roots. 28 years old and 7 years into his service at the imperial palace, the British expatriate had earned his position through exceptional skill and discretion, qualities that had made him invisible to the royal family he served. The morning air carried the scent of damp earth and spring blossoms as Asher placed another cutting in the ground. The rhythm of his work, the predictability of growth and decay, had been his comfort in this foreign land since his arrival in Japan in 1889. The son of a distinguished botanist from Cambridge, Asher had traveled to Japan to study its flora, only to find himself unable to leave when his father died unexpectedly, leaving behind substantial debts. The position at the imperial palace had been his salvation. "Mr. Caldwell," called a voice in accented English. Asher looked up to see Tanaka, the head steward, standing stiffly at the edge of the garden path. "The Empress requests additional chrysanthemums for tomorrow's ceremony. She specifically mentioned your white varieties." Asher nodded. "I'll prepare them immediately, Tanaka-san." After the steward departed, Asher gathered his tools and moved toward the chrysanthemum beds. As he neared the eastern pavilion, a sound caught his attention, a melody played on a koto, followed by something unexpected. Footsteps, light and rhythmic. Curiosity drew him along the covered walkway. Through the wooden lattice of the pavilion, he saw her. Princess Eleanor Byrne, daughter of the British ambassador Sir William Byrne, moved in a dance that was neither fully Western nor Eastern. Her body created shapes that spoke of things Asher had never seen expressed, grief, perhaps, or longing. Her usual formal composure was replaced by something raw and honest, her face transformed by an emotion that seemed to pull from somewhere deep within. Asher knew he should leave. This moment was not meant for his eyes. The princess, staying at the palace as an honored guest while her father negotiated trade agreements, was expected to maintain perfect decorum at all times. If discovered watching her, Asher would certainly lose his position, perhaps worse. Yet he remained, transfixed by the authenticity of her movement. In the rigid world of the imperial court, where every gesture was calculated and observed, this unguarded moment felt like a rare blooming of a night flower, precious in its brevity. When she finally stopped, breathing heavily, Asher silently withdrew, carrying the image of her dance like a seed in his heart. Eleanor pressed her forehead against the cool paper of the shoji screen, her breath still coming in short gasps. 23 years old and unmarried, she had accompanied her father to Japan partially to escape the pressures of London society, where her reluctance to accept suitable proposals had begun to cause concern. What her father didn't know was that Eleanor had been using their diplomatic travels to study dance forms considered improper for a lady of her station. In India, she had secretly watched temple dances. In Turkey, she had glimpsed the movement of dervishes. And now in Japan, she had become fascinated by the contrast between the rigidity of no theatre and the fluidity of folk dances rarely performed for foreigners. "Miss Byrne?" A maid's voice called from outside. "Your father requests your presence for tea with the imperial household." Eleanor quickly smoothed her hair and straightened her Western-style dress. "I'll be right there." As she walked through the garden toward the main palace, she noticed a gardener working among the chrysanthemums. Something about his focused attention to the flowers made her pause. He looked up briefly, his eyes meeting hers before quickly lowering in deference. "Good morning," she said, breaking protocol by addressing him directly. "Good morning, your ladyship," he replied, his English accent surprising her. "You're British," she stated unnecessarily. "Yes, your ladyship." Asher Caldwell, head gardener for the Eastern Grounds. Eleanor found herself curious. "How long have you been in Japan, Mr. Caldwell?" 7 years now." He kept his eyes respectfully lowered, but she noticed his hands, strong, capable hands that held the stems with unexpected gentleness. "The chrysanthemums are beautiful," she said. "The imperial symbol, I believe." "Yes, your ladyship. These white varieties are particularly prized for ceremonial occasions." A call from one of her father's attendants drew her attention. I must go, she said. It was pleasant meeting you, Mr. Caldwell. He bowed slightly, still not meeting her eyes directly. The honor was mine, your ladyship. As she walked away, Eleanor felt an unexpected sense of connection. In this foreign place where every interaction was governed by invisible rules, the brief exchange had felt almost normal. Days passed. Asher continued his work in the gardens, occasionally glimpsing Princess Eleanor during official functions or as she walked with her attendants. Each time, he remembered her dance, the freedom and honesty of it contrasting sharply with her public persona. One afternoon, as he pruned the wisteria near the library pavilion, he heard raised voices inside. Through the open window came the stern tones of Ambassador Byrne. Eleanor, this alliance is crucial. The Viscount has excellent prospects, and the marriage would cement our position in the negotiations. Father, I've only just met Viscount Hammond. He's nearly twice my age and has made it clear he expects me to abandon any intellectual pursuits after marriage. You're being childish. What pursuits? Your drawing and your books? Many women give these things up when they marry. And my dancing? Would you have me give that up as well? A heavy silence followed. I had hoped you'd outgrown that inappropriate fascination. The ambassador's voice had dropped to a dangerous quiet. Your mother indulged you far too much in this regard. Dancing is for performers, Eleanor, not ladies of quality. Mother understood. Your mother is gone, he interrupted sharply. And I will not have you embarrass this family with such improper behavior while we're guests of the Emperor. Asher heard footsteps approaching the door and quickly moved away from the pavilion. Moments later, Eleanor emerged, her face composed but her eyes bright with unshed tears. She walked quickly down the path, away from the main palace buildings, toward the more secluded western garden. Without conscious decision, Asher followed at a discreet distance, concerned by her distress. When she reached the small stone bridge over the koi pond, she stopped, her shoulders beginning to shake with silent sobs. Hesitating, Asher debated whether to retreat or approach. Propriety demanded the former, compassion urged the latter. After a moment, he stepped forward. Your ladyship? Are you unwell? Eleanor straightened immediately, quickly wiping her eyes. Mr. Caldwell. I'm quite well, thank you. Asher nodded, pretending to accept the obvious untruth. This bridge offers one of the finest views in the garden, he said, changing the subject. The Emperor's grandfather commissioned it specifically to frame the view of Mount Fuji on clear days. Grateful for his tact, Eleanor turned to look at the distant mountain. It's beautiful. There's a Japanese concept called mono no aware, the pathos of things, Asher said quietly. It speaks to the bittersweet feeling that comes from recognizing the transience of beauty. Eleanor looked at him with new interest. You've studied Japanese philosophy. Only informally. My position affords me access to the Imperial Library during winter months when garden work is less demanding. The librarians have been kind enough to translate certain texts. They stood in silence for a moment, the impropriety of their conversation hanging between them. I saw you dance, Asher finally said, the words escaping before he could reconsider. Several days ago, in the Eastern Pavilion. Eleanor's face paled. You saw me. I apologize for the intrusion. I should have made my presence known. She turned away, gripping the bridge railing. What must you think of me? A diplomat's daughter, behaving like a common performer. I thought it was beautiful, Asher said simply. Honest in a way few things are in this place. Eleanor looked at him with surprise. You're not shocked. Why should I be? The body can express truths that words often fail to capture. At least, that's what your dance conveyed to me. A call from somewhere in the garden interrupted them. Eleanor straightened. I should return before my absence is noted. Of course, your ladyship. She hesitated, then added, Thank you, Mr. Caldwell, for your discretion. Always, he promised, bowing slightly as she departed. The following weeks brought a subtle shift. When Eleanor walked in the gardens, she often found herself on paths where Asher was working. Their conversations, brief and circumspect, revealed shared interests, literature, botany, and the cultural traditions of Japan. One evening, as Asher was preparing to leave for his modest quarters outside the palace grounds, he found a small package wrapped in silk near his gardening tools. Inside was a book of Japanese poetry with certain pages marked by dried flower petals. On those pages were poems about dance, nature, and hidden feelings. The next day, he left a rare white camellia blossom, symbolizing admiration in the language of flowers, where only she would find it during her morning walk. Thus began their secret correspondence. Books borrowed from the library were returned with pressed flowers marking significant passages. Eleanor's sketches of garden scenes were left where Asher would find them, and he responded with rare seeds or botanical specimens from his personal collection. During a formal garden party, Eleanor stood among the diplomatic corps while Emperor Meiji addressed his guests. Her eyes briefly met Asher's across the lawn. Though they did not speak, the connection between them felt more real than any of the carefully choreographed interactions around them. That night, unable to sleep, Eleanor slipped from her quarters and made her way to the eastern pavilion. The moon illuminated the garden in silver light as she began to dance, giving physical form to emotion she dared not name. "You shouldn't be here alone," Asher's voice came softly from the shadows. "If you were discovered..." Eleanor stopped, breathing heavily. "I needed to dance. Sometimes it's the only way I can think clearly." He stepped into the moonlight. "I should go." "No," she said quickly. "Stay. Please." I'd like you to watch, if you would." Asher hesitated, then sat on a stone bench partially hidden by a maple tree. Eleanor took a deep breath and began again, her movements telling a story of constraint and yearning. As she danced, she felt his gaze not as an intrusion but as understanding, perhaps the first true understanding she had ever known. When she finished, they sat side by side on the bench, silent under the vast night sky. "My mother taught me to dance," Eleanor finally said. "She studied in Paris before marrying my father. She believed that art wasn't just for looking at or listening to, it was for experiencing with your whole being." She sounds remarkable. She was. When she died 5 years ago, dancing became my way of keeping her with me. Eleanor's voice trembled slightly. Father never approved, even when she was alive. Now he wants me to marry Viscount Hammond and forget all of this. Asher's hand rested on the bench between them, close enough that Eleanor could feel its warmth without touching it. "What do you want?" The question, so simply asked, brought tears to her eyes. "No one has asked me that in a very long time. Perhaps it's time someone did." Their fingers brushed, a touch so brief it could have been accidental. In the rigid world of the imperial court, it felt more intimate than an embrace. Summer faded into autumn. The maple trees in the imperial garden turned crimson and gold as tensions in the diplomatic negotiations increased. Ambassador Byrne became increasingly insistent about Eleanor's potential engagement to Viscount Hammond, who had arrived in Japan to participate in the trade discussions. "The man is insufferable," Eleanor confided to Asher during one of their clandestine meetings in the chrysanthemum garden. "He speaks of me as though I were a particularly valuable export to be acquired." Asher's jaw tightened. "Your father can't force you to marry against your will." "Can't he?" "Women have less freedom than you might think, even those born to privilege." She touched a chrysanthemum blossom. "My father controls our family fortune since my mother's death. Without his approval, I have nothing, no means to support myself, nowhere to go." "You could stay in Japan," Asher suggested quietly. "There are Western women who teach English to the daughters of noble families. With your education, my father would never permit it. And without references or his blessing." She shook her head. "Besides, I have responsibilities to my family name, to my country." "What of your responsibility to yourself?" Asher asked. "To the truth of who you are?" Eleanor had no answer. Later that week, a formal dinner was held to honor the diplomatic delegation. Eleanor sat beside Viscount Hammond, enduring his condescending commentary on Japanese culture with forced politeness. Across the room, Asher supervised the palace gardeners who were arranging elaborate floral displays. During a musical performance, Eleanor excused herself. In the garden outside, she took deep breaths of the cool evening air. "Running away, my dear." Viscount Hammond's voice came from behind her. "Just getting some air, Viscount." He moved closer. "You know, when we're married, these little escapes will have to stop. A viscountess has obligations that require her consistent presence. You speak as though our marriage is already decided. Isn't it? Your father has made his expectations quite clear." Hammond's hand closed around her arm. "And I've made a considerable investment in these negotiations with your father's assurance that you would be part of the arrangement." "I am not a commodity to be traded, Viscount," Eleanor said firmly, trying to pull away. His grip tightened. "Don't be naive, Eleanor. Women of your station have always been valuable assets in forging alliances. Your father understands this, even if you pretend not to. The princess asked you to release her arm, Viscount." Asher stood a few paces away, his face composed but his eyes hard. Hammond's eyebrows rose. "And who might you be to interrupt a private conversation?" "He's the imperial head gardener," Eleanor said quickly. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm fine. You may return to your duties." Asher didn't move. "Forgive me, your ladyship, but you appear to be in distress." Hammond released Eleanor's arm with a dismissive laugh. "Know your place, gardener. The princess and I were having a private moment that doesn't concern you. Everything in these gardens concerns me, Viscount, including the well-being of those within them." Asher's voice remained level, but there was steel beneath the courtesy. The Viscount's face darkened. "Your impertinence will be reported to your superiors. Now leave us." "It's all right, Mr. Caldwell," Eleanor said, her eyes conveying what she couldn't say aloud. "Please, go." After a moment of hesitation, Asher bowed and retreated. "Insolent servant," Hammond muttered. "When we return to England, you'll learn to manage staff properly." Eleanor's heart raced as she realized the danger Asher had put himself in. "We should return to the dinner, Viscount. My father will be looking for us." The next morning, Eleanor heard that Asher had been summoned to the head steward's office. By afternoon, rumors circulated among the palace staff that the British gardener had been reprimanded for speaking improperly to a distinguished guest. When Eleanor finally located him, he was working alone in a remote corner of the garden, methodically transplanting bulbs for the spring bloom that would come long after the diplomatic delegation had departed. "Mr. Caldwell," she called softly. He looked up, his expression carefully neutral. "Your ladyship?" "I heard what happened." "I'm so sorry, it's nothing," he interrupted. "A warning only. I've been at the palace long enough that my work outweighs a single complaint." Eleanor knelt beside him on the damp earth, heedless of her dress. "You shouldn't have intervened. Should I have stood by while he manhandled you?" Asher's composure cracked slightly. "While he spoke of you as property to be acquired. You risked your position, your livelihood. Some things are worth the risk." His eyes met hers directly for once, without deference. "You are worth the risk." The words hung between them, too honest to be ignored, too dangerous to be acknowledged. Eleanor touched a freshly planted bulb. "What are these?" "Daffodils," Asher replied, accepting her change of subject. "They'll bloom in early spring with bright yellow flowers. They symbolize new beginnings. Will you be here to see them bloom?" His hand stilled in the soil. "I've been offered a position at the Botanical Gardens in Yokohama. The director is an old colleague of my father's." Eleanor felt a sudden hollowness. "You're leaving the palace?" "It seems prudent, given recent events. And it's an excellent opportunity, research rather than just maintenance." "I see. When would you go?" "After the New Year celebrations." He paused. "Before your delegation departs for England." The implication was clear, before her expected engagement to Viscount Hammond became official. "Congratulations," she said, the word feeling like ash in her mouth. You deserve such an opportunity. That night, Eleanor danced alone in the Eastern Pavilion, her movement speaking of loss and resignation. When she finished, breathless and tear-stained, she realized Asher was watching from the shadows. "I thought you'd come," he said quietly. She wiped her tears. "I needed to dance." "I know." He held out a small wooden box. "I have something for you." Inside was a simple journal bound in indigo-dyed cloth. Opening it, Eleanor found pages of pressed flowers, each labeled with Asher's neat handwriting, Japanese name, Latin classification, and traditional symbolism. "Every flower I've ever given you," he explained. "And spaces for the ones that haven't bloomed yet." She traced the dried petals of a camellia, his first gift to her. "It's beautiful." "The last pages contain seeds," he continued. "Japanese varieties that will grow in England. So you can keep a piece of these gardens with you." The unspoken meaning was clear, a piece of him. Eleanor closed the book carefully. Asher. It was the first time she had used his given name. The sound of it seemed to break something between them. Without words, they moved toward each other, meeting in an embrace that defied every boundary of class and propriety that separated them. "I can't lose you," she whispered against his shoulder. His arms tightened around her. "You haven't even found me yet." The following weeks passed in a haze of stolen moments and mounting tension. Ambassador Byrne pressed Eleanor daily about the Viscount's proposal, while the court buzzed with preparations for the New Year celebrations, the last major event before the diplomatic delegation's departure. During a rare moment alone in the library pavilion, Eleanor showed Asher her latest sketch, a self-portrait dancing among cherry blossoms. "I've decided not to accept Viscount Hammond's proposal," she said without preamble. Asher looked up sharply. "Your father will be furious, yes. But I cannot marry without love, not even for diplomatic advantage." She took a deep breath. "I've applied to the Empress's cultural exchange program. They're seeking Europeans to document traditional Japanese arts for preservation." "The Empress's program? How did you?" "A Lady Hanako, one of the imperial consorts, has taken an interest in my sketches of the court dancers. She suggested I might have talent worth developing." Eleanor's eyes shone with determination. "If I'm accepted, I could stay in Japan for at least a year, studying traditional dance forms and documenting them through art." Asher stared at her, hope warring with caution. "And your father would permit this?" As an imperial invitation, it would be difficult for him to refuse without causing offense. And a year would allow time for... She hesitated. "For what?" "For possibilities," she said softly. "For daffodils to bloom." He reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining. Eleanor, the sound of approaching footsteps forced them apart just before Lady Hanako entered the pavilion, her attendants trailing behind her. "Ah, Miss Byrne. I hope to find you here," the elegant Japanese woman said in perfect English. "The Empress wishes to discuss your application personally." Eleanor bowed deeply. "I am honored beyond words, Lady Hanako." As she followed the imperial consort, Eleanor glanced back at Asher, her eyes full of promise. The New Year's celebration transformed the imperial palace into a wonderland of lights and color. Diplomats and nobility from across Japan and abroad gathered in the Great Hall, while outside, the gardens glowed with paper lanterns. Ambassador Byrne, unaware of Eleanor's application to the cultural program, had arranged for Viscount Hammond to formally propose during the evening's festivities. Eleanor, dressed in a Western gown with subtle Japanese elements that Lady Hanako had helped her select, moved through the crowd with outward calm that belied her inner turmoil. "The Empress has agreed to announce my acceptance to the cultural program tonight," she whispered to Asher during a brief moment when she paused near a floral arrangement he was adjusting. "Before the Viscount can propose publicly. Your father will still object." "Not if the Emperor himself endorses it. Lady Hanako has arranged for imperial approval, a gesture of goodwill toward cultural preservation that my father cannot refuse without diplomatic consequences." Their conversation was interrupted as Tanaka approached. "Mr. Caldwell, you're needed in the Eastern Garden." There's been some damage to the arrangement near the performance area. With a respectful bow to Eleanor, Asher departed. She watched him go, trying to quell the anxiety rising within her. Everything depended on the Empress's announcement coming before Viscount Hammond could create a public expectation of their engagement. As the evening progressed, Eleanor found herself cornered by Hammond and her father. "The ambassador tells me you've been avoiding my company, Eleanor," the Viscount said with a tight smile. "Rather poor manners, wouldn't you say?" "I've had many obligations as a diplomatic guest," she replied evenly. Ambassador Byrne cleared his throat. "Eleanor, the Viscount has something important to discuss with you. I've arranged for a moment of attention from our hosts in just a few minutes." Eleanor's heart raced. "Father, I don't think." "It's time, Eleanor," he interrupted firmly. "This alliance is crucial for Britain's position in the negotiations." The Viscount has been more than patient. Before she could protest further, the Emperor's chief attendant approached. "Ambassador Byrne, Her Imperial Majesty requests the presence of Lady Eleanor for a special announcement." Relief flooded through her. "Of course." As they moved toward the imperial dais, Eleanor scanned the crowd for Asher, wanting to share this moment of victory with him. She couldn't see him among the garden staff positioned discreetly around the perimeter. The Empress, resplendent in traditional court robes, welcomed Eleanor with a gracious nod. Through an interpreter, she began speaking about the importance of cultural preservation and exchange between nations. Eleanor stood tall, her future unfolding before her, a year in Japan, freedom from an unwanted marriage, and time to explore what might grow between her and Asher. Then Ambassador Byrne stepped forward, interrupting with diplomatic smoothness. "Your Imperial Majesty, before your announcement, might I be permitted to share joyous news of our own? My daughter has received a proposal of marriage from Viscount Hammond, strengthening the bonds between our nations." Eleanor froze as Viscount Hammond moved to her side, taking her hand possessively. The Empress looked momentarily confused as the interpreter whispered the translation. "Father, no," Eleanor began, but Hammond's grip tightened painfully on her hand. "Smile, my dear," he muttered. "You're making a scene." The Empress spoke again, her words translated, "We congratulate the young couple on their betrothal. Such personal connections between our nations are valuable. And now, to our announcement regarding Lady Eleanor's artistic contributions." But the damage was done. In the eyes of the court, Eleanor's engagement was now acknowledged by the Empress herself. To refuse now would create a diplomatic incident that could undermine her father's entire mission. As the Empress spoke about the cultural exchange program, offering Eleanor a position documenting traditional dance forms, the victory felt hollow. She would have her year in Japan, but under the shadow of an engagement that would eventually pull her back to England and a life with Hammond. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Eleanor accepted congratulations with a fixed smile, all the while searching the crowd for Asher. When she finally managed to slip away to the garden, she found Tanaka supervising the cleanup of broken lanterns. "There was an incident," the head steward explained when she inquired about Asher. "Mr. Caldwell intervened when some intoxicated guests were damaging the Eastern arrangements. There was an altercation." "Is he hurt?" Eleanor asked, fear sharpening her voice. "No, but he has been sent to his quarters. The foreign guests involved were friends of the Viscount. It was deemed best to remove Mr. Caldwell from the situation." Eleanor's hands clenched into fists. "I see. Thank you, Tanaka-san." Dawn found Eleanor in the Eastern Pavilion, dancing with a desperation she had never felt before. Her body moved through grief, rage, and finally, resolution. When she finished, she was not surprised to find Asher watching her. His face bore a bruise along one cheekbone, but his eyes were clear and determined. "I heard about your engagement," he said without preamble. "Congratulations. It's not what I want. Yet you accepted." "I was trapped. My father announced it before I could speak." She moved closer to him. "But I've also been accepted to the cultural program. I'll be staying in Japan for a year." "Under the Viscount's claim," Asher said, his voice heavy. "A delayed marriage is still a marriage, Eleanor." Not if I refuse to go through with it. She took his hands in hers. A year gives us time. Time for what? For me to rise above my station? For your father to suddenly approve of a gardener with no title and no fortune. Time for us to find a way forward together, she insisted. I won't give up so easily. Asher touched her cheek gently. The Viscount's friends made it clear last night what happens to servants who forget their place. I've been warned that any further incidents will result in my immediate dismissal, without references. Because of me, Eleanor whispered, anguish in her voice. No, he said firmly. Because of a world that values titles above character and wealth above worth. She leaned into his touch. Then we'll leave that world behind. Japan is changing. There are opportunities here that don't exist in England. And your family? Your responsibilities? My responsibility is to truth, to what is real. She pressed her forehead against his. And this, what's between us, is the only real thing I've ever known. Their lips met in a kiss that defied every boundary that separated them, class, culture, expectation. When they parted, Asher's eyes held a new resolve. My position at the Yokohama Botanical Gardens begins in 3 weeks, he said. It includes housing on the grounds. Yokohama is less than an hour from Tokyo by train, Eleanor noted, hope rising. I could easily travel there while working on the cultural documentation project. It wouldn't be easy, Asher warned. Your father, the Viscount, they won't simply let you go. Then we'll need to be smarter than they are. Eleanor's mind raced with possibilities. Lady Hanako has offered to be my patroness in the cultural program. She has considerable influence with the Empress. And you believe she would support this arrangement between us? I believe she already suspects it. There's a reason she sought me out in the library that day. Eleanor smiled slowly. The Japanese have a concept called bien, a connection between people that transcends circumstance. Lady Hanako mentioned it when she saw my sketches of the court dancers, and the gardens where you work. Asher considered this. Even with her support, there would be consequences. Your father could cut you off completely. Then I would build a new life with the skills I have. My art, my languages, my knowledge of 2 cultures now. Eleanor's voice strengthened. I am more than my father's daughter or the Viscount's prospective bride. I always have been. The rising sun illuminated the garden around them, the first light catching on dew-covered leaves and petals. Asher looked at Eleanor, really looked at her, seeing not just her beauty but her courage, her determination, the truth of who she was beyond titles and expectations. There's a Japanese proverb, he said softly. The hawk with talent hides its talons. You've hidden your strength for too long, Eleanor. She smiled. Perhaps it's time for both of us to stop hiding. Spring came to Japan in a riot of blossoms. In the imperial gardens, the daffodils Asher had planted burst into golden bloom, a promise kept. Eleanor Byrne, now officially part of the Empress's cultural documentation program, had established herself in a small house in Tokyo, where she studied traditional dance forms and created detailed artistic records of performances that were rapidly disappearing in modernizing Japan. Ambassador Byrne had returned to England with the diplomatic delegation, his negotiations successfully concluded despite his fury at Eleanor's decision to remain behind. Viscount Hammond, after a very public display of wounded dignity, had quickly found another prospective bride with an even more advantageous family connection. Lady Hanako had indeed become Eleanor's patroness, ensuring that her position in Japanese society remained secure despite her father's disapproval. The Empress herself had expressed interest in Eleanor's unique perspective as a foreigner documenting Japanese cultural traditions. On weekends, Eleanor traveled to Yokohama, where Asher Caldwell's research at the Botanical Gardens was earning recognition among international botanists. Their relationship, while still raised eyebrows in certain circles, was accepted within the more progressive community of scientists, artists, and cultural preservationists who inhabited the space between East and West in rapidly changing Japan. On a perfect spring morning, they walked together along the shore of Yokohama Bay, the cherry trees in full bloom around them. I received a letter from my father yesterday, Eleanor said as they paused to watch fishing boats returning to harbour. The first since he returned to England. Asher's hand tightened around hers. What did he say? That while he cannot approve of my choices, he recognizes my determination. He's released my mother's inheritance to me, and not a fortune, but enough to ensure I won't face hardship. That's unexpected. Eleanor smiled. Lady Hanako may have written to him about my contributions to preserving cultural heritage. She can be quite persuasive about the diplomatic value of my work. Diplomatic value, Asher repeated with a slight smile. Is that what they're calling happiness these days? Eleanor laughed, then grew serious. Are you happy, Asher? This life is so different from what either of us expected. In answer, he drew a small package from his pocket. Inside was a simple ring set with a pearl. In Japan, pearls symbolize wisdom gained through experience, he explained. They grow beautiful only through challenge. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears as he continued. I can't offer you a title or a grand estate. But I can promise to nurture what grows between us with the same care I give to the rarest blooms. He knelt before her, heedless of the curious glances from passers-by. Eleanor Byrne, will you marry me? She pulled him to his feet, her answer written in her eyes before she spoke it aloud. Yes. 1,000 times, yes. As cherry blossoms swirled around them like pink snow, Eleanor remembered her secret dance in the Eastern Pavilion so many months ago, and the gardener who had witnessed her most authentic self and kept that moment safe in his heart until she was ready to claim it fully. Now, in the clear spring light, they held each other without hiding, their love a rare bloom that had pushed through every barrier to reach the sun.